order to communicate successfully, they are going to need to construct that communication. That good communication doesn't typically happen by accident. So a lot of this is like learning that each one of these principles is a building block that makes up all media, and it's going to make up their media. So it's like these are tools, communication tools.
Okay. That is probably one of, without all my spelling errors, that is probably one of the best learning focuses I've ever seen.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
You win.
Because one, it incorporates the key important things that Lee wants students to walk out of that class with. It pushes at all levels of the depth of knowledge, because those depths of knowledge that you're pushing is all the way to creation, which is kind of when we think about the next generation of learning, it's about creation. I can see that his assessment can be in here because you're going to look about how do you build those critiquing, how do you assess whether they can communicate, and I bet you have assessments that are already built that do that. And you have your units that you're going to measure each unit, like where are they with emphasis, repetition, texture balance. And so you'll have assessments for each one of those to see if they know it. And then you could build a goal that would say, well, you know, 100% of the students will at least demonstrate 70% proficiency on the assessments that measure that. There you go. You have it. Now, you can take it and kind of, you know, whatever, I crushed all the words there somehow. But that's, you took all that you knew and you would put it in a statement that you really could say, okay, I can see, how did my kids do? And hopefully when we get into it and you go, whoa, that was a little bit big, oh, wait a second. That state of revision is what we want to do. We want to come back and say, well, and even you started revising, you go, well, wait a second. Let's start a little bit more narrow so I can figure this out. That's what we want to do. How does that feel as a learning focus for you?
It feels terrific.
Thoughts?
Thanks, Ted. Throw it out to the crowd. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh.
I feel good.
I guess I think it's great. We'll start there. I think it's great. But I'm having a hard time, I'm a math person, so maybe that's why. I'm having a hard time seeing how, but you said there's going to be a goal. So this is a focus.
This is the learning focus.
And then there will be a goal, and that will address
You mean
how...
there'll be a target.
Oh, a target. And
Yeah.
that's where you're going to address how you're going to measure.
Yes.
Okay.
But see, I will say, when I read Lee's other pieces of it, correct me if I'm wrong, you assessed your students already, didn't you? Kind of some fundamental, and what Lee's already done is he's kind of gotten what I would call, here's an assessment term. He's done a curriculum-based measure, which means a curriculum-based measure is something that he assessed the students on kind of some foundational skills that are the underpinnings of the whole course. So what was that assessment you kind of did with the students?
So every week, along with our units, we look at the work of professional communicators. You know, so for photography, it might be a famous photographer, or photojournalist, or another artist in some form. And we discuss their work all week and write essays about it and interpret it. And from day one, this year, I was already throwing out a lot of visual information for kids to respond to, and I'm asking them to do these things. They're writing, and they're supposed to be performing these things about the stuff that I'm giving to them, and it's while we're still doing nuts and bolts stuff and community building stuff, and I haven't done any like this is how you do it or vocabulary stuff yet.
Right. So what Lee's done is he's got a baseline measure. That's not a pre and post assessment. What he's done is he's done a baseline measure on the fundamental skills that they might have, or what he's kind of assessing. And he's probably seen students that maybe have some prerequisite skills, have some really strong knowledge, and may see some students that really struggle to write at all and communicate. Well, now I'm going to jump to like maybe my criterion 3, if we thought about it. Those students that he's starting to earmark is going, ooh, they really struggle to express themselves in writing and communicate. That may be his criterion 3. When he sets his overarching target is going to be, even criterion 3, what do they got to get to? You know, at the end of this time, where do I have to get to that thing? They're very different targets. I will say this. These are very different targets and very different constructs than we used to be thinking around how PLC goals are set. It's very different. Because PLC goals were kind of set what they would call SMART goals that set on 6-week cycles of units of instruction. And the one problem I always kind of had is the world didn't get solved in 6 weeks. Kids are complicated, and they take a long time. And so but the cycles are not bad. He still has units, right? And he can assess accomplishment away on the units of instruction. But his overarching goal is going to be this fundamental compilation of what it is. And it can be the sets of units, because I remember seeing yours too. Because yours is there. I think it's all set. It's the compilations of those units that's going to be your...
That's exactly what I'm trying to do, is his is so overarching with math sometimes. I mean, there are pieces that go through the entire year, but then there's definite things that are just these 2 weeks, these months.
But
you know.
so what you got to think about is those become those little things in the IE parentheses.
Yeah, the building block.
Those are the building blocks.
Okay.
But there's the fundamentals,
Right.
things about like how you had, like I think, communicate, or I read a lot of them in the last week, and so, but I remember yours had that piece of it.
Right.
So what we got to do is, the reason why this is so important is, once you do this, your assessments become, the ability for you to evaluate what you're going to use as your evidence becomes much more clear. Because you've really defined the things you want the kids to know. The reason why I feel this is so important for us to do this right is if I was to handed you some visual arts common assessment, it would be totally disconnected from anything you're doing. And that's going to be your evaluating whether your kids learn? Well, that's not going to evaluate anything. It's going to evaluate a set of standards way out here that is totally disconnected from the work. If you accomplish this with all your kids, that's amazing work. That's why we have to write it so well. But it's not easy. It's not easy. So I'm going to come back, really kind of an emotional feeling. Does that feel doable? Does that bring clarity, or does it bring more confusion?
It brings clarity.
Okay.
And no, it brings clarity, and you know, I think part of it for me is figuring out, you know, what form it takes, you know, for the rest of the semester. And part of my confusion too is like, do I have to do this for criterion 3 and 6, or is it 3 or 6, or both and neither?
It's one or the other. It's 3 or 6.
So that's a small population versus all
The
students?
3 is the small population. So you could look at it and say, okay, that group that you've started to earmark, kind of, a lot of the ones that Rhode Island do, they kind of go at a level 1, level 2, level 3 students. They kind of categorize students kind of like have some real lacking skills. Students that seem to be right where you would predict for them. And then some students you go, whoa, they've come in with stuff that surprised you. So if you were to think about the criterion, is you would say, well, I could circle those students in your pre-assessment and said, okay, I'm going to work on those, and I'm going to set a goal that all these kids are going to get to X based on that. Well, you know, if you set that goal, you actually have essentially done a 6, because all the kids are going to get there. You've just said, my most emphasis right now is with that set of 8 kids.
And does that set of 8, okay, so it could be as few as 8?
Yeah.
Okay, and it could be 8 kids throughout the day, or it could be 8 kids in one period. That's
right.
That's for me to.
Yeah, if you have multiple sections of photography, you take all the kids in photography, not one class, but all the kids in the course, and say, these are the kids I noticed were the low ones based on my assessment.
Okay.
And so that's where the baseline data we talked about is, he set baseline data that is an assessment of students' current content knowledge, current knowledge. You could have gone back and also looked at like maybe their MSP scores or something like that, some reading and writing, to also get some other data points to say, oh yeah, they really struggle in those areas. You could look at previous grades. And then you can also look forward into your curriculum and say, you know what, students always struggle here. This thing always makes them sideways. So that's those three pillars of baseline data that you would all use. The one that always has to be is the one that you do. And it's on a curriculum-based measure, not a unit-based measure. And what I mean by that is a unit-based measure is a unit of instruction. I want them to know emphasis. And I have an assessment for emphasis. You'll have unit-based measures from kind of an assessment person's hat. I see you have unit-based measures in emphasis, repetition, texture, and balance, because you're assessing the knowledge there. Your curriculum-based measure kind of assessed all of it. It wasn't as deep, but it had a long screen of all of that measure. That's why what you wrote was, when I looked at it, you have all the components. The important piece is, as educators, we know what those components are. Because it's what you do is teaching and learning. You have to, because if you don't know it, then you don't know what you're missing, what piece you're missing of that process, to truly make your assessments reflect the instruction that you do. So,